So we're going to roll into a little bit of the nutrition. Thank you for the encouraging comments. And like I was saying, we try to make everything so simple that sometimes I feel like self-conscious, like, am I really teaching anybody anything they don't already know? But I'm happy to hear that someone said common sense is not common anymore. So my dad used to say there's a principle in public speaking called KISS. Yep, keep it simple, stupid. So I try to do that. So I just want to touch a little bit on the nutrition, because that's kind of my most comfortable place as a nutritionist. And you'll see in the book we're on the orange section, and there's a section called what should my family eat? Sorry, I'm echoing a little bit. And that lesson makes a really good case for a plant-based diet. In a lot of cultures around the world, people think, oh, in order to build muscle, I have to eat muscle, right? And so this makes the case looking at the animals, some of the biggest, longest living animals in the world, and how they have tremendous muscles like elephants, and yet, basically all these animals, elephants, giraffes, etc., they're all vegetarians. And so it makes a good case, which I think many of us do know, about the whole recycled food and how you don't want to eat recycled food. And then also we break it down into 3 different types of food: grow, go, and glow. And I'll touch on that in just a moment. But first we ground everything in the Word of God. And so we look at, Genesis 1:29 tells us what to eat. But Genesis 1:31 says that he saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. So the evening and the morning were the 6th day. And so Genesis 1:29, I'll just go back to it. I, was not raised Adventist, but I had become a vegetarian, and I came across that Bible verse telling us what to eat, and it basically says eat seeds, and then the fruits that come with the seeds. And I was like, it just really hit me, because I have been, for decades before that verse kind of hit me on the head, when I was in Uganda and I started writing this curriculum, I just realized, I'd been eating beans and rice ever since I'd first gone to Latin America, and realized that that's what most of the world lives on, is a form of a grain and a legume combined. And then in college I had learned about, all the amino acids, and I could name them all, and I could do the whole Krebs cycle, which was in biochemistry, and it got all fancy. But at the end of the day, it was a combination of legumes and grains. And then I realized that in Ezekiel 4:29, God gives the same recipe for grains and legumes that I had learned about and that cultures have been eating all over the world. And he gave that to Ezekiel, and that's what he was eating over a period of over a year, and he was just drinking water. So clearly there was something going on with this simple combination of grains and legumes. And of course, Sister White talks about that as well. She combines nuts. And she didn't like legumes very much. Actually, they didn't sit that well with her. And I'm maybe convinced that, I don't know, maybe she wasn't soaking them properly. Yeah. That's what I think. Because the soaking of grains and legumes is something really, really important. And we talk about that in some of our lessons. But I wanted to touch on this rainbow lesson. And that's because I think most of us are getting the protein we need as Americans. If we have any level of dietary diversity at all, and any amount of beans, if we're in a plant-based diet, you do need to get beans or nuts for a good portion of your protein, although you can get it from grains as well. You can even get protein from broccoli. But I do really commend people to eat beans. The Dan Buettner guy, the researcher that studied the blue zones, he said that if you eat beans every day, you get 4 years extra of life, just with beans every day. And remember, they're like one of the cheapest foods you can eat.
Very high calorie
But
too.
the calories in beans, I would say, they're so good for you. The soluble and insoluble fiber, so good for like keeping a slow burn on your like the metabolic index, where whether your glucose goes up or not. Beans are just fabulous for keeping a slow, steady energy source. And the oils in there are so important for you too. You know, your brain is like 80% oil, like the it's called the myelin sheath, which connects your synapses. It's sort of like when you have an electrical connection, you have the plastic over the wire. That's what the oils become, that plastic over the wiring in your brain. So don't be afraid of oils, and especially natural oils that are in the seed that's already contained in your nuts and your beans and everything. Don't be afraid of those calories. Yes?
What oils do you actually recommend? Like cod liver oil? I mean, not cod liver. Flaxseed oil?
You know, people have all different feelings about oils. I'm one that I just try not to be like too extreme about anything. And so, yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of different kinds of healthy plant-based oils. It is often good to make sure that the way that it's expressed out of the seed is, you know, the cold pressed, like virgin ones are definitely better, because there is a chemical that's used to extract, like to make soybean oil, for example. There's a chemical that's actually carcinogenic that's used to extract the oil out of the seed. And I think that's probably used in a lot of the, you know, regularly processed oils that you'd find just in regular stores. So, you know, I think oils used in a small amount and the highest quality you can get is what I would recommend, but not necessarily fixate on one type.
I heard this one thing that they're talking about some tropical oils, like palm oil is not good. You know, when you're looking at your better oils, would be like your olive oil, but there's, like you say, there's different choices that you can choose. And I think that if I'm going to choose an oil, I want the best.
Yeah.
And if palm oil is not a good oil, I would rather go to the ones that are. What do you think about eating according to your blood type?
I have zero expertise on that, I'll just say.
What do you think about the concept of not eating vegetables that take the life of the plant? See, tomatoes is a fruit. A potato is not the fruit. I mean, that's like a radish. You're taking the life of the radish. You're taking the whole plant.
I've never heard of that in my life.
Well, you're looking at your scripture here.
Right.
You know, you got, you know, herbs were not mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
They came later.
Right.
See, so there was an addition to God's plan.
Interesting. Yeah, definitely, like the leaves and the herbs and everything were later. I've never heard of that idea about taking the life of the plant. I guess I would have to look into that, but personally I would recommend, yes, that the plant is for our consumption. That would be my feeling, because they can make seeds, and so they can make more plants. So.
But if you eat the plant, you don't get a seed.
Right, but there's like you plant more than one, right? So you can save some for seed and others for, so yeah, if there was only one radish on the planet, then yeah, let it go to seed.
I think tubers and things like that, you have to harvest them a certain way so that you can continue to grow.
And extra for the
You know,
rabbits.
like the ginger and the turmeric and all that, you can't take all of them.
Yeah.
For me, one's for the rabbits.
Yeah. So I'll show you what we recommend with farm stew. I mentioned water before. We always touch a lot on water, and one thing I don't like about most dietary guidelines is they never include water. So ours is resting on the foundation of water. And then we saw in the scripture that God says to eat that which is pleasing to the eye. And what is more pleasing to the eye than the rainbow? So we have our rainbow of fruits and vegetables going over the foundation of the water. And that's really to try to promote dietary diversity. And dietary diversity is a really important thing in that not just one thing is going to give you what your body needs. And so eating across the rainbow, and I'm just trying to find that lesson real quick. It is on page
16.
Oh, good. Thank you. Yeah. Eating across the rainbow, we saw that, you know, when Noah God made the covenant with Noah, it wasn't just it wasn't kind of random. It was a covenant between me and all the life on the earth. And so that rainbow was the sign of the covenant, And so I think it's not a stretch to say that, you know, that rainbow would represent something that would give us life. Of course, we know that the rainbow has been hijacked by a certain movement that is not life-giving whatsoever. So I feel like this is a way of reclaiming God's covenant promise to us by using this idea. And the idea of grow, go, and glow is actually in the previous lesson. Let me just refer back to that real quick, because that's an important concept. On page 3 of this meal section is the concept of grow, glow, and go. And we find this in the rainbow. The grow foods are those protein and building block foods, which are primarily, we talk about that they're like the bricks and boards that are used in buildings. It's the proteins. The proteins, every single cell, and like even DNA and everything, it's protein. And so you have to have good solid proteins, and then you also have to have the good solid fats. A lot of, you do have some Adventists that you look at them and they're like emaciated, and you just think that can't be healthy, we need to have some good quality fats. And so they're even more nutritious and easy to digest when they're soaked overnight and or sprouted a day or two before cooking. Sprouting is absolutely phenomenal when you think about it. And, maybe if we have a really diverse diet and we're healthy and everything, we don't need to think about sprouting. But, at time of trouble, I like that Ezekiel 4:9 bread company, they make it sprouted. I mean, there's certain nutrients that multiply by 25 times when you sprout the grains. And it's basically, the way I understand it is that, God, when you think, somebody brought up earlier today, Joseph's storehouse and the dream of the 7 years and then the 7 years of lean, 7 plentiful years, 7 years of lean. I mean, God created a chemical structure in plant foods, seeds and grains that basically like locks up those nutrients really, really tightly. So you have like the Fort Knox. And so some of the criticism against plant-based nutrition is because of those locks, or I call them natural preservatives. But in the literature, it's called anti-nutritional factors. So you might have heard of like phytates and how they prevent absorption of certain nutrients. Well, for every, it's phytic acid is like what inhibits the absorption of certain nutrients. But for everything like that, there's an enzyme, like in the case of this phytase, ACE is the, suffix that means enzyme. It's gonna break it down. But the way that a seed in the ground goes from being, just a dormant seed to a germinating plant, it requires heat from the sun and it requires water, right? And then the seed starts to germinate. So farmers know that. Well, nutritionists often don't think like farmers. We just take those seeds and we put them into a machine and it pulverizes it, right? And so you end up with flour and then you make your bread. Well, in the times before we had machines, those seeds would have been soaked first because it'd be easier to pound. Like in the mortar and pestle, it's easier to pound it after they've been soaked. So that soaking process is what activates all the enzymes and starts it getting ready for life again. And so to me that, and we talk about this in our manual, that you're unlocking or basically removing the preservatives that are keeping that seed from being able to be consumed. If we didn't have that lock on the seeds, it would be just the weevils and all the bugs, and it would just go rotten, right?
So are you saying that we should soak all our seeds and our grains before we consume them?
It would be highly recommended on my part. And not everybody does it, and we don't necessarily have to, because we get enough dietary diversity, we get enough calories, we get enough. But the soaking of all legumes, really. The only ones I don't soak are lentils, because if you do soak them and then you cook them, they can turn into total mush. Like if you do them in the Instapot, they're the only ones I don't soak. Everything else I soak overnight in terms of beans, and grains would be advisable as well.
So do you soak the
the beans for germination, or to get rid of some of that, I don't know what the word is, that's sort of hard to digest. What? Okay, is that what comes off of the?
Lactic
Like,
acid?
yeah, soybeans have the phytic acid, and I think different beans have different levels of it, but it's a bigger problem in soy. It's why soy sometimes gets a bad rap. Because I think the protein quality in soy is so phenomenal. It's basically you have all 9 essential amino acids for humans, plus you have it in the right ratio for human health in soy. So soy is actually really a unique food, but it gets a bad rap, I think mostly because it's a great competitor to the meat and dairy industry, and so they just trash it. But like, yeah, if you look at like soy milk compared to almond milk, compared to coconut milk, blah, 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 you know, all the other ones, none of them have protein like soy milk. So if you're trying to get protein, you really, unless you have a soy intolerance for some reason, soy milk is by far the best option in terms of a protein replacement of milk. But yeah, soaking seeds is actually really, really a powerful tool. And I would strongly encourage it. And I know not many of us do it because not many of us are cooking from the grain itself. It really doesn't do a lot of, you don't want to like soak the flour, you want to soak the actual seed.
So, one thing I learned not that long ago is that after you cook them, you should rinse that water off. That is yeah, like
After
I
you
know
soak them, you mean?
after you cook them.
Okay.
You rinse them off.
After you soak it, you want to rinse that water
Yeah.
off too.
Yeah. But like you don't want it, because I know a lot of people, they'll season up their beans, they put it in the Instant Pot, and they eat them. Where you actually should cook the beans, rinse them, and then.
I have not heard that. What I would recommend is definitely pouring off the soaking water and rinsing them after soaking them. But I think if you do a proper job of rinsing them off after soaking, I think you can consume the bean water.
Well, it's not that you can't, but if you have where you're more sensitive to the
Okay.
lectins,
Yeah.
then that will help with that.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. Just to compare, what I heard about that is not really fully cooked, but the first boiling water after rinse, and rinse and throw it out, and then the first water that it boils, you rinse it and then you let it cook. That is how I learned about this throwing out, not really fully cooked.
Okay, interesting. David.
Are they bringing the beans to a boil and then cutting it off and letting it soak to the next day? Is that what they're saying?
I think that's maybe what you're talking about is that it's
Well,
like
I can cook 'em.
you're talking about cooking. I would recommend if you are going to boil it and then soak it overnight, then yeah, definitely get rid of that water. If it's just like bringing it to a boil. Some people bring it to boil, some people just leave it in the water. I just leave it in the water overnight because I'm always thinking like somebody that doesn't have firewood or something.
Well, doesn't the boiling and the soaking and you pour it off, that gets rid of the gas out of the beans?
Yeah,
Is
it
that
does a
correct?
good job with that. And again, you think of it like a seed in the ground. It has the heat from the sun and then the water. So it's the same thing. You're just unlocking the power in that seed. So, yeah.
I heard about some kind of buckwheat that was really healthy for you. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I have heard buckwheat's really amazing, but I'm not like an expert on buckwheat.
Was it Starry that was just talking about that this morning?
Okay.
Yeah.
So she's a good one to ask
Yeah.
about buckwheat.
It's a wonderful grain, especially if you have allergies.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and it's very versatile. You can use it in so many different things, and it's excellent for babies, believe it or not, for little people.
Oh, interesting.
Or for somebody who's very sick and can't tolerate a lot, you can actually boil. Again, come back to sprouting. Soaking it overnight increases the, I don't know what the word, but it increases the how it works for the body.
Yeah, bioavailability. Yeah.
So when you do that, and then so if you have a very sick person, you can soak that, you can boil it, you can blend it, and they can drink it and get all the vitamins they need without the stress.
Interesting. Yeah, I've heard good things about buckwheat, but I have not looked into it real heavily. So,
What's the difference between the dried bean and the fresh bean. We don't eat many dried beans because we eat them fresh. Like if I'm gonna eat black eyed peas or butter beans or green beans or English peas, whatever, it's gonna be fresh. We don't dry it.
Okay.
What's the difference between the two?
Well, okay, so that's a perfect example. Take, for example, let's say edamame compared to soy, right? You know edamame, the green pod of soybeans?
Yeah.
So that doesn't require soaking, of course, because the nutrients in it have not ever gotten into that locked condition. And so like an edamame, you mash those beans and you can consume that without just maybe 5 minutes of cooking it, right? And so those nutrients are going to be more bioavailable. But at the same time, if you left it on your counter for a week, it would be rotten, right? Compared to the soybeans you could leave there for 100 or 1,000 years and you'd still have the soybeans. So I think there's advantages to eating it fresh like that, but not everybody can do that all the time. Even in the winter, you're not probably growing them fresh. I don't know, maybe you have access to getting them fresh. Oh, you can them. Oh, that's great. I think that's ideal. They just went from fresh to fresh. Yeah. And I think that, we have to trust God that, if he gave Joseph that mandate, to store up the seeds for the 7 years, like he gave the power to those seeds to be able to be dormant and then reactivated in a way that is healthful. And I think that's the beauty of, really the message, even the time of trouble, is like we should have 50-pound bags of these seeds hanging around, and if you store them properly, they can store. I mean, they're finding ones like in the tombs in Egypt and stuff that will still germinate like thousands and thousands of years later. I mean, that's a miracle, really. So anyway, those are the grow foods. And so you find the grow foods here in the middle, basically the legumes and then the fats and the proteins. We had a huge debate whether we were going to put a fish on there or not, and the fish wound up on there. And you can tell me that you don't think it should be there if you want to, but a lot of cultures, they really don't eat very many beans, and so if they do have a clean lake, which there are some still out there on the planet, we feel like it's not the worst recommendation, especially if our goal is addressing malnutrition. So that's how it ended up on there. The glow foods, just really all of those protect the vitality. And I'll touch more on that on the rainbow, but we call those like the nails or the mud and mortar that holds the building together. So, those are where you're going to get a lot of your minerals and vitamins and the phytonutrients in all the rainbow colored foods. And we'll jump more into those in just a few minutes. But then the go foods are the energy foods. And we try to represent ones that are representative of, what people eat with, cassava and a lot of maize and amaranth down there, and the traditional grains, wheat and rice and everything like that. So those are predominantly your energy foods, and we talk about that like the electrical wiring in your building. That's how you're going to move and do what you need. And we do have a whole section on the value of whole grains versus the white processed grains, and there's a lot of amazing research on that. We actually have a bunch of slides on that too, just showing, for example, 1 bowl of brown rice, you would have to eat 7 bowls of white rice to get the same mineral content. Yes?
What about millet? Is that a grain?
Yeah.
I heard it was very popular back in the 1890s and the previous century.
Those are some of the types of things we try to encourage people and say, what were your ancestors eating? In Africa, they were eating a lot of millet, and there's pearl millet, and then sorghum. So some of those more ancient grains. And sadly, maize has just taken over the continent of Africa to where I was mentioning down there that people are getting between 30 to 50% of their calories. And during COVID, a lot of governments were handing out bags of maize. So I bet their calories were coming 70% from white processed corn flour. I mean, it's like a recipe for diabetes and other micronutrient deficiencies. So we really want to diversify. So millet would be a great idea. So real quick, in this Grow, Go, and Glow rainbow dietary guide that we like to promote. We just want to remind everybody that, you know, Satan has his own counterfeit rainbow. And so there's all sorts of crazy foods out there. And, you know, you think about just when you make a copy at a copy place, you know, it usually costs maybe, I don't know, 5 or 10 cents for a black and white copy and like 50 cents or $1 for a color copy. And you think about all those colors just in the ink cost so much, and yet you go into a grocery store and everything's so colorful. Every bag, every package, everything. And then a lot of the foods are colorful. You know, you got Lucky Charms, you got Skittles, you got M&Ms, all this stuff. Everything is about color, and it's all this counterfeit of God's natural rainbow. And so we are attracted, we're told to eat that which is pleasing to the eye. We're attracted to it. And so Satan's going to have a counterfeit to the truth, right? But in the true foods, you get just a plethora of fantastic things that are so good for you. So many things. In fact, there's at least 5,000 beneficial phytochemicals. Phyto just means plant-based chemicals that are beneficial. So you can't even start to memorize half of them. But we know there's antioxidants, anti-inflammatories, antibacterial, antimicrobial, things that are protecting from cancer, regulating cholesterol, triglycerides, and cardiovascular health, just to name a couple of the beneficial things you can get from fruits and vegetables. And I was talking to Dr. Joe, right, last night, and he was talking about how he didn't learn half of what he knows now in his medical school. And when I went to school for nutrition 30 years ago, I mean, they didn't even know what a phytochemical was or what an antioxidant was. Like, they weren't even teaching that. So anybody that's older than me, if all they know is what they learned in a regular public school to become a dietitian, they don't know any of this stuff. And I came out of there, even I was already a vegetarian, but I came out of there thinking that fruits and vegetables were just kind of expensive calories. Like, the way that they were teaching, they really weren't of that much value. They didn't have a nutrition label on it. They weren't, you know, fortified.
No label, not any good.
Yeah, and I mean, it was almost like it was just not even a big deal, you know, like if it had a label and could tell you that it was fortified, it had to be better than, you know, God's thing. And it's like, it's just so wrong. And thankfully, you know, I think the nutrition world in general has come a long way to understanding the power of fresh fruits and vegetables. And, you know, even the government is promoting it, you know, with WIC. They have like WIC bucks now, so the Women, Infants, and Children program, you know, people can shop at farmers markets now using WIC dollars. I don't know if they have that around here. But when I was with the health department, that was something. I was working with farmers markets and promoting that. So there's a lot of actually even money, grants and everything, not saying you necessarily want to go for it and mess with the government, but there's a lot of promotion now trying to get fresh fruits and vegetables into the mouths of all sorts of people, because they know, especially people that are on Medicaid, they're going to pay for it in their health care if they don't pay for it on the front end in prevention. So there's a good science behind it. With phytonutrients or phytochemicals, really the darker the color, the stronger the aroma, and the stronger the flavor, it's going to be better for you. And that's just a general simple rule, but that's what FARMSTEW is all about, is just general simple rules. Of course, there's some exceptions, you know, cauliflower and garlic obviously are white, but, you know, they're still really good for you. One thing I love to talk about is the cruciferous vegetables. I don't know if you know what cruciferous means. Yeah, the kales and everything. Exactly, it's named after the crucifix, the cross. So their flower is like in the shape of a cross. And they're the most detoxifying vegetables out there. So they're removing the cancers and everything from you, just like the cross detoxifies us from sin, right? So it's just another fun little way of sharing God's message. One thing I just want to mention, vitamin A deficiency. About half the kids in developing countries have this, and I wouldn't be surprised if more than half have it here too, because kids are just not getting what they need, and it results in reduced immunity, blindness, night blindness. Sometimes when people can't see at night, it could just be a vitamin A issue. And then also the vitality of their skin tissue. So vitamin A deficiency is a huge problem, and it can be solved by just basic things like in orange fleshy foods, so mangoes, sweet potatoes, cantaloupes, squashes, yeah. And then also the green leafy vegetables also are a great source of vitamin A. And but a lot of families, being a nutritionist, I hate to say it, but I look at what people buy in the grocery store, and you don't see a lot of green leafy vegetables going down the little conveyor belt, and you don't see, pumpkins or squash or mangoes hardly ever. Maybe those carrots, but even now people don't peel their carrots. They buy them in the little things which are dipped in some type of "ide." And I just mentioned "ide." I want to just say, we were talking about prefixes and suffixes earlier. If it says "ide," pesticide, fungicide, herbicide, suicide, right? "Ide" is a suffix that means to kill. So if you have, for example, I'm not recommending cheese, but if you have grated cheese and you're buying it pre-grated, that has fungicide because it's trying to prevent that from turning into fungus, which is what it would. The pre-grated, all these, salad mixes where it's already chopped up for you. All of that has to be dipped in some kind of "ide," or else it would be going bad. So again, I want people eating vegetables. If that's the only thing they're gonna eat, fine, eat it, but know that it has an "ide" with it. And you're a lot better off doing your own chopping at home, and even better off growing it in your home. So you want to avoid the "ides." And sometimes they don't even have to list it as an ingredient because it's just like they washed it in some kind of water with some kind of something in it. But it's got something, or it would be going bad in a matter of 2 days. And in the store, it's all about reducing perishability. And what I like to say is, if it's non-perishable, like white bread or, a Twinkie, that means it's dead. Like biologically dead. If your food is perishable, that means it's alive and it can die. So if you're wanting to keep your body alive, you want to eat food that's alive, which is why the fresh beans probably are more bioavailable than the dried beans, right? So just think about that in terms of when you're shopping, you trying to have food that's alive. And generally in most grocery stores, that's about 10% of your food, right? Everything else is just dead as a doornail. So
you said that something, that pre-washed vegetables, like you get in Costco, those pre-washed organic spinach or mixed greens. Do you think that is washed out also with some kind of?
I don't know for sure. Like the ones where the whole leaf is cut and in a pre-washed thing. I have less concerns about that than the ones that are shredded already into a coleslaw type form. I'm certain those are washed in some type of preservation chemical type thing. So, yeah. But it's balance. If you are busy and that's the only way you're gonna get a spinach salad is one of those pre-washed. I think the pre-washed is probably less scary than the chopped for sure. So, and then just 2 more slides I want to share. The herbs and spices. They are incredible. Some of the herbs, they're 50 times as strong as if you ate a vegetable of the same thing. So again, the aroma and the flavor, they contain the largest quantity of nutrients. Small quantities are enough. And of course they enhance the flavor and the nutrients and everything. So getting your herbs and making it flavorful, it's worth the time, the trouble, and the expense to do that. And then I'm going to wrap up so I can say goodbye to these guys. Protecting the rainbow. I just went one slide too far, it looks like. Anyway, just really want to just re-emphasize this whole rainbow idea. It's nutritious, it's colorful, it's flavorful, it's attractive, and if you do it right, it's inexpensive, and you can get it from local foods, and hopefully in your garden, your rainbow is abundant. So just really want to encourage people to think rainbow when they eat,
think also try to eat seasonally.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yes.
And you know, I have this little rainbow postcard. Or little bookmark. I'm not sure if we brought them, but I have probably in the car. I'll try to maybe bring some tonight. And actually, Juanita started passing this around, but it didn't get around very far. If you're open to hearing from FARMSTEW again. Oh.
Thank you. Juanita got on it.
Yeah, I forgot to. It sat there the whole time. Yeah. Anyway, I passed out these rainbow, and it has a Bible verse on it, and it's a Eat the Rainbow bookmark. Hopefully, we'll find them in the car. And I passed them out at Rotary, and a guy said to me a couple weeks ago. He said, "I put that on my refrigerator, and I'm using that as my guide of how to eat." So it's just a simple little thing, you know, and it has a Bible verse right there. It's just an encouragement. So just using this information, simple ways to reach out to people, and just want to encourage that. So I think I'll wrap up, and we can pray, and then I can hang out as long as anybody wants to. So, alrighty, let's bow our heads. Heavenly Father, I just want to thank you for this time and for the simple knowledge that you've given through your word, and that we can elaborate on it with science. And I just pray that this will be a blessing, and I do pray that the information that I'm sharing, that it will be used in lots of different creative ways, and maybe I'll get to hear about how it's a blessing in this community. And I just pray for each and every person that we can be a source of life and a source of joy to others, and be able to also have a healthy and abundant life for ourselves as well. And we know that in you that we live and move and have our being. And so we also ask for your Holy Spirit each and every day to give us the power to do good and to eat well and to just be a representative for you. And we pray all this in Jesus' holy and precious name. Amen.